Hi, my name is Kevin, and I collect old irons.
Hi, my name is Jay, and I collect old electric irons.
I don't really know a lot about electric irons, but my friend here, Jay, literally wrote the book about the subject. Today's video is dedicated to the very early history of electric irons. And when, Jay, did that history begin?
Kevin, the history began in 1890 when Charles Carpenter of St. Paul, Minnesota began to produce electric irons. He produced them from about 1890 to 1894.
And these irons are pretty rare, aren't they?
They are, Kevin. As of now, I think there's only 5 surviving examples of Charles Carpenter's iron. One of them is a hat iron, 2 of them are laundry irons, and 2 of them are tailor's irons.
And these are pricey?
They are. They are really the most valuable in terms of dollars electric irons that I'm aware of.
So Jay, what's this?
Kevin, this is an iron made by the American Electric Heating Company of Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it dates to a little bit before the year 1900. This company, American Electric Heating, acquired the patents of Charles Carpenter's company in 1896. And this company was more successful than Carpenter Electric Heating because they continued to produce irons for a good 25 or 30 years until they were acquired by General Electric. Well, this iron in particular happens to be a hatter's iron. We know it is because of the curved surface and the rounded front. This stand, which was made by Simplex for the iron, is typical of Simplex irons of the early 20th century. It has a slate base with a cast iron stand affixed to it. The unique feature of some of Simplex's irons is this, right here. This is a switch. When you begin to use the iron and you hold this down, the electricity flows. When you put it back in the stand and allow the switch to come up, the flow of electricity stops. And this was an important bit of technology because until the mid-1920s there were no reliable thermostats built into electric irons. As long as the current continued to flow, the iron would continue to heat, and eventually they would get hot enough to start fires. And in fact, they started many thousands of fires between 1900 and 1930. Simplex was the only company to produce an iron with this kind of spring-loaded, called a dead man's switch in the handle.
Well, I can tell that this is a Simplex iron because it's on the Simplex style stand built on a piece of slate or soapstone, and those stands are quite common. You see them in antique shops all over the place, but something here that's interesting is we also have the cord and the plug.
Yes. Well, this iron dates to around 1905, and this is typical of Simplex irons of this period. The cords are still permanently attached, which is a feature of the earlier electric irons. And as one can see, this would screw into a light bulb socket. In the early days, the only place people had electricity in their home was for lighting, and the light bulb typically hung from a single strand, from a wire from the ceiling. So they would unscrew the light bulb and they would screw in their iron, and then they could iron with it. So that also meant that they could only iron during the day, because if they unscrewed the light bulb at night, they wouldn't be able to see. One other evolution in the technology from this iron to the one that we saw earlier is that we're now seeing the bodies with a nickel plating, which was typical of irons from around 1905 to about 1925, when chromium was invented and irons became chromium plated.
Well, I can see on the back plate here that this is also a Simplex, so it obviously looks more modern. It even has its built-in stand.
Yes. Yeah, built-in stands started to show up sometime in the teens. This iron dates from the 1920s, I believe. And you'll notice that this iron does not have an attached cord. Now it has a cord that would slide into this receptacle on the back. And this became one of the ways that people controlled the temperature of their iron. When it got hot enough, they would pull the plug out and use it for a while until it was too cold, and then they would put the plug back in and it would start to heat again. As you'll notice, there's nothing on this iron that's there to control the temperature. This is perhaps the last style of iron that Simplex produced. Not too long after this, they were acquired by General Electric, and for a while General Electric put that name, Simplex, on some of their irons, but eventually they stopped using it altogether.
Jay, were there any other companies making irons in the 1890s?
Yes, there were. In the late 1890s, around 1896 or 1897, two companies started in Detroit, Michigan. At the time, they didn't even know that the other existed, but after a short while, they discovered each other and they merged shortly after 1900. One of the companies was United Electric Heating, and the other company was American Electrical Heater. And when they merged, they kept the name American Electrical Heater. And this iron was produced by American Electrical Heater prior to 1900. I don't know exactly, but it carries a patent date of March 5th, 1897. These are also quite rare. I only know of 5 prior to 1900. This is one of them. It's interesting to me for a variety of reasons. The body is in 3 sections with 2 layers of asbestos. Other early irons, usually you just see 1 layer of asbestos. And of course it has a cord that's not meant to be detached, which I think I said earlier is a sign of a fairly early electric iron.
So this is the American Electric Heating Company.
Yes.
And that?
This is the American Electrical Heater Company. The names are very similar, and they both were producing irons in the 1890s, but this one was in Detroit, and this one was in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
So this is a more common American Electrical Heater Company. This is one that I actually have in my collection. We've seen in some previous videos. This one has the cord and the plug as well. What else can you say about it?
Well, they went from this to this around 1908. They made this in various sizes. This is the smallest size. It's a 3, which means 3 pounds. They also made a 5, 7, and 9, and they might have made bigger ones. By far the most common is the 7. There are other irons of this period that have these rather decorative castings in the top. It's sort of an influence of the Art Nouveau era, which is around that time.
And this brings us to basically the last piece in this particular video, the American Beauty nameplate, which is very commonly seen in a variety of irons into the early 1900s.
So in 1911, the American Electrical Heater Company of Detroit began to produce this iron. In the first year or 2, I believe, they had these dark red handles, and they were nickel plated. Soon after, they started producing this more common version, of which they sold many millions. They're quite easy to find nowadays, and they all had black handles, and they were chromium plated. The American Beauty brand name continued to be used well into the 50s, and it evolved over time. When the 30s came along, they became much more streamlined, and they produced commercial irons. It was an enormously successful company based in Detroit, which still exists to this day, not by the same owners, but they're still making electric soldering irons.
So the story continues. The more you learn about old irons, the more you realize you have a whole lot more to know. I can highly recommend Jay Raymond's book, and if you wish to buy a copy, we will include his website among the descriptions after the video. And if you would, please, if you have not already, subscribe. You can still send comments there or email me at any time. I enjoy answering your queries.